Hello, everyone. Welcome to Frontiers, exploring the world of data. As you know, Frontiers dives into how people are using their data oriented minds to shape organizations and change the landscape outside of big tech. So, in each episode, we explore the far reaching corners of the world of data. My name's Jasmine, and I'm your host for this series. And in my day to day work, I focus on empowering people to make data driven decisions. So, I'm always interested to learn about how others are doing it themselves. Today, we are exploring the glaciers of gaming, how data informs and shapes our modern play. It's a world I've always been curious about. I'm really excited to have our guest here. Our guest here today, Tuck Ngun, Principal Insights Analyst at Riot Games for League of Legends. Before Riot, Tuck held senior data scientist roles at Oracle and Sense 360 after getting his doctorate from UCLA in human genetics. So he wasn't always in gaming, but since he's been at Riot for the last 5 years or so, it seems that once he's gotten the gaming bug, he hasn't looked back. And so we're going to dive into all those details of that in this episode. So glad to have you here today, Tuck. Really excited for our conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited too.
So, get into our icebreaker today. So, the question is in relation to gaming: if you could be a player in a game, what player would you be and why? So, it's just like very vague. So, for me, my player, I don't have too much gaming experience, I will have to admit. So, my game that I grew up playing in like middle school and high school was Halo. I love Halo. Just not it was before it got into like the real online playing mode where you play against other players. It was very much just like campaign mode or just like me and my brother kind of playing the story. And I really enjoyed that. I'd really just and on easy. I'll have to caveat it had to be on easy mode as well for me to get the full enjoyment. When it got too hard, I get really I'm not that great. So when it got too hard, it wasn't as enjoyable anymore. So I really like playing Master Chief in Halo. So I think I'd probably play that. It just seems like, the player's invincible. I kind of do whatever. I really love it. The sword, it's really cool because it like lights up, it's all glowy and it's super powerful. And I think what differentiates it from other games is the fact that it's in like there's a lot of space uh, like in the game, and I'm like a Star Trek nerd. I really enjoy space, so I think the setting really kind of drew me in. So I really like that game. So that's who I would play if I was in any game. But Tuck, you have a lot of experience in gaming, so curious what your player would be.
So this, I will have to admit, this was actually one of the questions that you sent over that I looked at. This was one of the hardest ones, I would say, because it's like, oh no, I have to pick my favorite. So okay, I'm going to cheat a little bit and actually have two answers to this. Okay, so the first one is kind of much more developed. And it's maybe a little bit of a deeper cut, but it's Ash from Final Fantasy 12. So she's just an all-around badass, right? And so it's much more like an aspirational thing for me. You mentioned the setting of Halo and the setting of Final Fantasy 12 is definitely a place I would love to be. But Ash specifically, she is, like I mentioned, she's sort of like a deposed princess. Everyone thinks she's dead, and she's managed to maintain that for years while organizing an underground rebellion and basically, overthrowing the evil empire, all of that without blowing her cover. So, so far so standard for Final Fantasy, but I think what really sets her apart from a lot of the other protagonists of the series is that she just does it all in stride. She's like, okay, I have to do this thing. I'll just go and do it. She's like very no nonsense. There's no like agonizing over, am I good enough? Am I, this or that? Or she just does it. And it's like really refreshing. So like I really aspire to like that sort of level of, I guess you could say competence, confidence, whichever you choose. And then the second one is much shorter. And I promise this is not like me trying to, I guess, promote the game because this is not like our newest character or anything, but Hui from League of Legends, he's a artist who has like magical powers and he can paint, visions with his magical brush. Anyway, that is totally like my vibe and something I would love to be able to do.
You gave the characters so much justice. Here I am. I'm like, I just like the fact that it's a sword, and you like went into like their backstory and their character traits. Like, you obviously, you're in the right place. The fact that there's just so much, I think, like nuance and so much backstory to these games that I think the people that are in the world can really appreciate. So would you be able to take us into how you got into your current role and like talk about what you're doing at Riot a little bit more, and then yeah, tell us just at a high level your journey of how you got to there, and how it's different from what you've done before and kind of what made you stay.
Yeah, yeah, would love to do that. So I guess in terms of what I do, I'll start with that. So the scope of my role is, I would say, I guess, pretty large. So essentially, I am able to work across the League game ecosystem, and I'm starting to also push into like other parts of it. As part of the things that Riot is doing is, we have a TV show, Arcane, and so we're in the background. We're always like looking into new opportunities and stuff, and I'm very lucky to have had a chance to work a little bit on those. But my main focus is on the game, and typically the way it works at Riot or on League anyway is that analysts will tend to specialize in like different domains. So sometimes it might be gameplay or monetization, and I'm fortunate enough, I guess, to be able to essentially like pick what I want to work on. I mean, it's kind of a really, it's a privilege that I don't take lightly. I get to kind of go after what are sort of the most important questions. And so I've been able to work on things like, oh, how do we how do we grow our player base for League? How does a player's interaction with the game, with League, sort of change over time? Because we're very lucky to have very loyal players. And so, we really want to, and I think part of that loyalty comes from, just how much we really value the player experience and try to optimize for that as much as possible. I've also worked in the monetization space, so I've worked on things like, okay, here's some new content. What's the best way to distribute it? That sort of thing. Okay, and then in terms of kind of the background of how I got into this role, as some of I guess the listeners might have realized just based on I guess my slightly psychotic description of why I picked those characters. I've just been playing video games my entire life. One of my earliest memories is actually playing Dig Dug with my mom at our first like home computer. Anyway, so it's always been always been part of my life. But for whatever reason, it wasn't until the last 5 years or so, or 5 years ago, that it kind of occurred to me of like, oh, I could actually have a career in data in gaming, right? I mean, it seems so obvious in retrospect, but for some reason, it just was one of those things that seemed a little bit impenetrable to me. But I was fortunate enough again to know someone who was working at Riot at the time. She said, she brought this current role to my attention. She was like, I think you'd really like it here. I have, and so it's just been really a wonderful experience, and I really actually truly enjoy playing the game as well. So it's like kind of win-win in that way.
Yeah, when I think of, data and gaming, it seems like something that's it makes sense, but in terms of actually like putting people's faces to, these roles, it's like you don't necessarily it's more of what goes on in the background, right? When you think of games, you think of like the players and you think of, they take up like the spotlight, but in terms of like all the stuff that goes on under the hood to like improve that experience, I think a lot of uh, people don't think of that as like, oh, there are specific roles that are people look to fill to help from like a data insights analysis perspective to improve the game, and it's like something that's constantly changing. when can you talk
Yeah,
Oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think part of it is just how rapidly the industry has matured, right? I mean, it used to be, I think, people would think of gaming as like yeah, I guess like maybe my parents' generation, right? The idea that someone could have a career in gaming and that could be something that's they do for life, right? Would be kind of ludicrous, right? And so I think because of that, it's just it wasn't something that was, and coming from Malaysia, especially where there really wasn't much of a gaming scene until mobile phones, smartphones really took off about 10 years ago, right? Again, it was just not maybe part of the atmosphere, part of the zeitgeist yet at the time.
And you're saying that it's been growing. I mean, you've been there for a few years now. Have you seen like the team dynamics change in terms of like the skills and the people that are like involved on projects or the types of projects? Like how have you seen the data analytics kind of focus change from like a people or like a project perspective since like you've joined?
Yeah, no, there's definitely been, a lot of changes, a lot of development at Riot specifically. But I think, yeah, also as you're alluding to, right, more generally in games. So I'll just start, I guess, by talking about how, my experience so far. So Riot's grown quite a bit over my time here. And along with that growth, in all of our departments, our Insights organization has also grown. And Insights is where data analysts at Riot, that's sort of our like our home base, if you will, our home department. Um, and so the way it works here is that each game typically has like a dedicated Insights team, some analysts, and then also some researchers, who are able to talk to our players directly. So the exact breakdown kind of depends on the game, depends on the game's needs, that sort of thing, and the size of the team also changes depending again on the game. But generally speaking, it's like 5 to 15 people per game, and then we also have some central resources that we can tap into. I think the other thing that's changed that I've noticed uh, in that's changed in my time here is that it's not just the growth in the number of people. I would say it's also the skill sets and the way, in general, we think about data and how to use it. It's definitely kind of gotten more sophisticated over time. So part of this is just people like myself maybe who have been around for a couple of years, so we've had the time to develop those skills, to learn more. But I think it's also part of it is we are more conscious about and maybe more knowledgeable about like who we want to bring in, right? So it's like we're starting to recognize that, okay, yes, data analysts, we're quite a lot of us are actually quite versatile, but at the same time, there's also like a little bit of specialization that can go on. And if you have a specific need, right, like if you can get someone who has a lot of experience doing that thing, it's really beneficial. And then if you need them to be more of a generalist later, they can kind of learn the other stuff, get better at it over time, right? But yeah, having someone who spikes in particular areas, particularly when you have a need for it, I think that awareness has definitely grown a lot.
Yeah, you're saying that there were, there's a lot of different things that you can provide insight into. A lot of ways that you can like a lot of different data points. I guess you can analyze, and there's different areas that you could affect. There's like the business aspect, and also like the actual game. I'm actually curious from like looking at improving the gaming experience. Do you have like any like stories or any sort of like projects you've worked on or anything that really stands out to you as really the most prominent things that you've enjoyed working on since you've been in like the gaming industry, like certain questions or insights that you're able to derive or certain questions you're trying to get after? Just curious if anything stands out to you.
Yeah, I would say yes, no. So I alluded or I did mentioned earlier that one of the things I've worked on, and it's kind of an ongoing thing, so it's never really done actually, is kind of understanding how our players evolve as they continue engaging with our game, continue interacting with it. It's quite I like I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but like I said, I feel very privileged, right, that we have such loyal players. and it's just really interesting to see how again how the it's almost like how the game fits into their lives, like it changes over time, right? From and you can kind of imagine this, in many scenarios, right? Of like, if you get into a new hobby, you sort of engage with it one way, but then over time, right, it changes. And so for us, we feel like League, because League has been around for so long, we are able to like kind of envision our relationship with the player in that way of like, this is not just, like a one-time thing or something that you're just going to engage with for a few weeks and then move on to something else, right? Like we are very much, I guess, focused on the long term, which I am very much in favor of. But also because of that, it actually makes a lot of things not as straightforward, and I'll give like maybe a little bit more of a concrete example. So like, in addition to, like I said, working on understanding how a player sort of interaction evolves, like one other way in which I think this focus on the long term manifests is like how we think about creating cosmetic content for the characters in our game. So basically, one of the things that League is known for is we sell, you can buy skins for the different characters in the game, essentially like alternate versions of them. And if we were focused on the short term, I think it would be actually that process would be much easier because we could just focus purely on revenue maximization. It would be very easy. It's just like, okay, here's the most popular character. They're getting a skin, every 6 months, right? Like, and it doesn't matter if we kind of like churn through or burn through like the creative space, if you will, for that character, right? Because we're just focused on the short term. We just want to maximize revenue. But because we want to cultivate that sort of long lasting relationship, we're trying to think in terms of like years and in some cases decades. That's much harder, but like at least in terms of years, right? So we're much more conscious about, okay, we just released we just released a new skin, a new piece of content for this character. So therefore, let's wait a bit, right? So that we don't burn out our players, so that we don't go, like just burn through again all of the options that we know of right now, right? To give ourselves time to develop new things, to really be thoughtful and considerate about how we go about running the game essentially, so that permeates like everything we do. Which, like I said, I'm very much in favor of, but it can make things a little bit complicated.
Yeah, there's so many things you said there in terms of like, you want to, and it's a partnership, you and the players. I mean, you don't want to take their loyalty. You never want to take that for granted. And so you have to be very thoughtful about the things that you introduce into the game. You can't just like throw a bunch of experiments out there and just expect that your customer or your players just going to be like, oh, okay, that's fine, because you have a brand, you have a story. Like each of those characters, the people are very invested in them, and that's really like this the whole game is centered around these characters. So when you're trying to make these decisions, though, in terms of like what to improve, what things to introduce, how do you go about making that decision? Like what it when people probably have a lot of ideas about what they want to do to enhance the game, but how do you decide what actually gets put in front of the players or not?
Oh, that's a very, very interesting question. And I think in the context of, well, any creative industry, right? Like it's kind of interesting to think about, as someone who's kind of more on the data side, right? To think about how those two spheres interact, because I think it's really easy to see them as being in conflict with each other, right? Because gaming, for instance, right, is definitely a creative industry first and foremost, right? Like it's all about kind of, I think, trying to, like, everyone in the gaming industry, right, is trying to create something that's new, something that's never been seen before, and it's but and so the creative side is definitely really important. But especially when you're talking about, okay, the scale of a game like League of Legends or like a Fortnite, or things at that level, right, where you have a global audience, you have literally millions of players that you're trying that you're trying to like serve. The creativity, I think that creative drive is an important part of the equation, but I think it can't be the only thing in that equation, right? Similarly, if you just took the data side and you said, okay, we're just gonna, you know, we're completely like base all of our decisions off of that. I think that's also a failing, right? And so I think one thing I've seen at Riot, and even at the best game companies, is that there tends to be a very kind of healthy sort of like back and forth. The word that comes to mind is tension, but I don't mean that in a bad way, right? I just think there's a healthy dialogue, a healthy conversation between the two sides where, it's we try to come together and try not to, I guess, impose our will or act like we're the ultimate source of truth, right? So to go back to to give a more concrete example, going back to like that whole question about skins of like, okay, which character should maybe get like a sci-fi themed one or a more fantasy themed one or more of a realistic, themed sort of alternate version, right? In a lot of those cases, right, we do rely heavily on, our designers, our artists to have that sort of creative vision to say like, okay, I think this is why it works, right? And then we on the data side, we try to back it up with like our, by analyzing player behavior. We also, like I mentioned, we have researchers, so we often also directly just talk to players. We do concept testing, all of that sort of stuff, so that we have a fuller picture, if you will, behind any decision that we make. And again, that extends also to a lot of gameplay decisions, right? A lot of it is driven, I would say, primarily by our designers, by our producers, but we don't all just go like on instinct, right? We try to, I guess, like sort of balance it as much as possible.
How do you get, you know, how do you get feedback on the, I know I'm sure it depends on, the project and what you're introducing, but can you give an example of how you know that you've done a good job? Because, to what you were saying before, there's we want to just maximize revenue, and then you could just, in the short term, but there's, when you're thinking about a long-term approach that you said, your team's taking and Riot takes just generally to this game, it's not always, success is not always just what you see in the short term. And so how do you know that you're on the right track? Like, how do you, like, what feedback levers do you leverage in order to know if you're on the right, if you're on the right track?
Yeah, no, as I sort of alluded to earlier, that is kind of one of the complications, right, of sort of this longer term view, which is you're right, it's a little bit at odds, I think, with kind of how just modern business operates in general, right, where there's more of a as like focus on the immediate, on the shorter term. And so for us, the way we try to balance it is we do have, metrics, or we do look at different measures in the short term, right? To say like, okay, was this new gameplay change or this new piece of cosmetic content, was this a success, in this first, let's say, week, 2 weeks, first month, right? It's kind of that shorter term, just so we can get a signal. But then oftentimes we'll also try to, adopt like, we do a lot of like try and get like a longer term view of things of like, okay, 6 months ago we did this, right? Do we see any like signals, whether it's in terms of the player behavior, right, which is kind of maybe more my domain, or when we like in terms of sentiment, right, when we talk directly to players, whether it's in focus groups or surveys, that sort of thing. Like, do we see any evidence that maybe this is, kind of performing as expected, good, bad, that kind of thing. So we're constantly trying to, kind of again get a more like balanced view of things, right? A more holistic view. But it can be challenging because especially with the longer term stuff, this is League like is a live game, right? It's a live service game, which means it gets updates basically every 2 weeks at least. And so there's things changing all the time. So if you're like, well, we had this thing 6 months ago, let's try and see if it has any effect now. it does get kind of complicated, but we try to do our best.
So you're saying that your focus area is on player behavior. How do you quantify player behavior? Is it just like how much time they're spending in the you know how much time they're spending playing, how much time they're spending like actively playing? I don't know if that's a thing, but is it like the number of times that they're changing characters? Like what? How do you quantify behavior?
Yeah, it's well, so we try to well, as you just described, there's a lot of different axes, a lot of different vectors that we consider. And it just which ones we look at, right, really depends on the question, the use case, the project at hand. We, as a we do have like new characters every so often, and so like one thing we are interested in is trying to see like, okay, when we do introduce a new character, right, how do our players react? Are there things that we can learn from, are we able to like change preferences almost, or are people kind of like they found their favorite and they stick with it forever? And maybe they'll try out this new character, but eventually they'll go back right to the old favorite. And so we try to understand things like that. For sure we look at, as you mentioned, like how often someone is playing, how many hours, because that is actually one of the signals, actually one of the most important signals we think for, was this change a good one or not, right? Because the with the obvious idea being, okay, if this wasn't something that our players like, they would stop engaging with our game as much or completely. So it is a tricky thing. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of the times we are also interested not just in necessarily quantifying per se, but like kind of understanding, right, their evolution and kind of how they view the game. And that is actually it's a very challenging area, but it's also really, I think, rewarding because it just kind of gives you like, we everyone has like assumptions, right, around like, oh, here's how someone will think of the game or how this game fits into their lives, if they've been playing for 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. And then as we kind of dig into it, a lot of the times we find things that challenge those assumptions, and then that feeds back directly into like, okay, where do we want to take the game next? What do we think is a good change? What do we think this is telling us about what our players needs are, right? And I'd say that's very rewarding because like ultimately that's what we are here to do. I would say, right, we want to kind of meet those needs as best we can.
Because I'm thinking about it from like an analytics point of view, when you're thinking about like the questions that you're trying to answer, some of these things I can see as like, okay, it's basic, it's looking at statistics, looking at the before and after. Do we see like maybe a significant change or statistically significant difference between the two? When we think of analytics generally, though, it could be, I guess the term can be very broad. You can leverage machine learning techniques, and to like if you want to do like sentiment analysis, like do you kind of like pick from the whole gamut of methodologies when it comes to like answering some of these questions you have about what steps to next take with the game?
Yeah, we do. We try to keep as open a mind as possible, right? And it really, what the I guess the sort of the best technique or the best methodology really depends on the question you're trying to answer and kind of the context around it, right? So, to give you like an extreme example, if there was like an emergent thing, right, or where we needed to like get an answer to something really quickly, like within a few days, right? Probably spinning up like a whole ML model from scratch, not the best idea, right? Just because of how much time that takes, right? Even if that might be sort of the technically the best way to do it, right? So it's kind of all about balancing like um, what the needs are, and then sort of having in your back pocket like knowledge of like what what are the best techniques, what's the best approach to deploy here. And I think I kind of want to kind of add a little bit of an addendum to that, which is not to say that as an analyst, you have to know every single thing out there, right? But it's more about getting, I guess, familiarity with at least a wide enough range of different techniques, different methodologies, so that when you do get a question, when you do get a problem to work on, you're able to, and based on the context, you're able to kind of select the best thing for that project, right? Like another example might be if you need the output from some modeling to be interpretable, right? To be like understandable so that you can take action on it. Again, something that's quite sophisticated, like something like setting up a neural network, right, might be technically the best way to do it, but oftentimes that comes at the expense of that interpretability part, right? Of that ability to like kind of take action on what you find or understand why something is happening. And so you might go with actually a simpler model. And there's nothing wrong with that because it's all about what is the best thing for this purpose.
Yeah, I like that interpretability part because I think when you're dealing with, trying to incorporate or introduce like new things to such like a wide reaching population, you really want to make sure that it takes a whole team to make a decision on something. So you want to make sure you can like explain it well, you can justify the proposal based off of something that they could understand as well. So I can see that simpler can be better in a lot of these cases to get your message across and to get buy-in, and then also to be able to like show over time that it's that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, or like it's still like you can still apply the same methodology over time and it's not going to be too broken.
Yeah, exactly.
So I wanted to close out this main part by just asking, you've been in this industry for a few years now. As you look kind of toward the future, are you seeing like from your vantage point, some emerging trends or emerging like areas that are growing when it comes to like data and gaming?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, so just generally speaking, data is, really a big part, a really important part of the gaming industry. And I think it's just going to grow from here. And so there's sort of like two sort of overlapping trends, but they're still kind of a little bit distinct. So the first one is that the main way actually, or increasingly common way that people sort of like purchase games now is online, right? So like I don't know if you're like familiar with Steam. Epic Games has their own platform, for instance, right? There was a whole series of court cases about that. Anyway, so that's one part of it, and then I think as a result of that, right, and especially as like consoles, for instance, have also gained the ability to connect to the internet, like that online, a lot of games that in the past might not have had an online component, right, increasingly um kind of have it now, right, whether or not it's sort of like part of the core gameplay. So like one good example of this I would say is the Dark Souls series, which is, I won't go into what it is, but essentially the core of the game, you could play it like completely offline, but there's a sort of an optional online part to it that does enrich the experience. And that again, that's just becoming more and more common among games, right? So like I'm pretty, I don't work for Bandai Namco, which publishes that series, so I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure there's they're trying to get as rich of a data set as they can, right, from those games, from when players choose to engage with the online portions of those games. So that's trend number one. And then the second one I would say is kind of more of a focus, more of a move of a lot of publishers towards prioritizing live services games. So that's games like League, Fortnite, Guild Wars 2, where essentially it it's supposed to be alive, if you will, right? Have a lot of support, have consistent, frequent updates for years on end. And now that I've had firsthand experience working in that in that sort of gaming sphere, it's actually it's really tricky, right? It's God, what's that saying? the trick is not to get there, it's maintaining it, right? Or it's like, sort of staying at your position. And I think that's one of the reasons why data is just becoming so important, because maintaining sort of if you are lucky enough to have like a successful live service game, like kind of maintaining that is really difficult. It's, I would say it's practically impossible without kind of good data. And even with good data, like I said, it can be quite challenging, but it's fun.
So you're seeing yourself, at least another 5 years. It's been good so far, so there's no reason for you to look elsewhere. It seems like the future's bright.
I think so. I mean, despite, I guess of course, it'd be remiss of me not to, um, I guess, acknowledge, right, that the gaming industry has had a whole bunch of layoffs, this year especially, including Riot, right? But I think it a part of that, I think, is, uh, you know, maybe sort of like correcting for like COVID, right? I think it was hard to understand exactly how to respond to that boom. So that's part of it. But yeah, overall, I do think it is quite a you know bright future for the industry. I do think it will. This I think this is a little bit of a bump, but in a few years' time, we'll be back on track.
Yeah, online gaming is like, just becoming ever so popular, and just everyone's becoming more and more, on everyone's getting online more, and everyone's like more connected. And with that comes more data, and with that comes more opportunity. So thanks for giving us some insight into that. We
Yeah, no problem.
usually end our episodes with this round of fact or fiction. So we're gonna like rapid fire through these questions. So I found these about games just in general, and so you're not supposed to know the answer to these, hopefully. All right, so number one, South Korea has the highest penetration of online gaming, with 96.4% of internet users playing games across all devices.
That one, well, I don't know if the number is completely correct, but I would say general, the sort of the yes, I would say that's a fact.
So that is false. So
Oh,
Indonesia has the highest penetration of online gaming, with 96.5% of internet users playing games. And then Philippines is second, and then Turkey is third, and then South Korea wasn't even on like that list, the top 10 at least.
oh, interesting. Well, I guess yeah. Actually, I think one of the things is, yeah, like you mentioned earlier, like mobile has really changed actually a lot of, yeah.
Yeah, across all devices. So I was like, oh, that's surprising. I was expecting it to be like Japan or China or something like that, but no, yeah. All right, second one. Uno is the most popular card game in the world.
I'm gonna say false.
That is
I'm
correct.
gonna get this wrong.
That is false. So poker is the most popular card game in the world. Blackjack is close. It's the most popular casino card game in the world. And then, solitaire and rummy are also like very popular. Uno was not on that list, but I think a lot of people think of it as like really popular. But worldwide, you got to go back to the classics. All right,
Yeah, makes sense.
third one. You're one for two. So third one. About 50% of video game players in the world are female.
Oh, this is a good one. I think if yes, I would say it's probably quite close to that if you, especially when you consider mobile gaming.
Yes, that is true. Yeah, and you also consider like puzzle games or like action adventure
Mm-hmm.
games, like all that. So I didn't think about it. I was like, oh, when I think of video games, I think of, the ones that you see that are most popular, League of Legends, World of Warcraft. I just think of like all those ones, and a lot of the players I see on the stage are all like men. Uh, but yeah, so I guess when you look at it from like a wide lens, I was surprised about that. All right, so you got two. All right, the fourth one. The longest board game in the world is estimated to take 1,500 hours to complete.
Oh, geez, I feel like I should know this one. 1500. I'm gonna say balls. How do you even put in 1,500 hours?
I know. So, so this is true. So
Oh,
yeah, the game is called The Campaign for North Africa, which I've never heard of before. But apparently, when they look at like how long it takes to complete the full board game, it's estimated to take 1,500 hours. So if you like worked on it basically like 3 hours a month or 3 hours like twice a month or something like that, like it would take like 20 years to complete it. Basically, like it's ridiculous.
right.
It's I don't know. If anyone has that game, like that's a
Yeah,
marathon.
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah. Okay, the last one. The Jenga tower. You're familiar with Jenga, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Jenga tower is 18 layers tall. So just normally.
Hmm.
Each layer consists of 3 blocks. Now, the tallest Jenga tower ever built, like in a game, was 40 layers tall.
Let me think. Is that even
I know you got to think, is it possible?
right? I'm trying to like math it out, right? Of like there are enough. Sorry, 18 times 3. Right, there are just enough pieces that if you did it like one, sort of like one block per layer, you could probably get there. Would you actually be able to do that in reality? Seeing, well, I guess if you're really skilled, I'm gonna say true because people can sometimes do really surprising things.
Yes, that's true. That's correct. It is true. So I think like 40, there was one place I found that was like 44 and one place that was like 40. So I'm just gonna like, that's really impressive. I don't know how people do that. But yeah, it's like, I
Yeah,
guess if it's just like one block, it'd be like 54, 54
yeah, yeah.
layers. But how can you do that? So yeah, so it's, yeah, so yeah, that's right. So we got 3 out of 5.
Oh, okay. So
That's great. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a great
not too
score. That's
bad.
a great score. I think I think that's like these are all just like, blind stuff. And I just think it's really interesting to learn about some stuff because I'm like, I didn't know this stuff about games just
Hmm.
generally. So the more you know.
Yeah, I know for sure. I mean, I learned two things today.
And I'm sure everyone listening learned a lot more, including me. So I think as long as it's beneficial on both sides.
I'm glad to hear that.
Well, Tuck, it's been a pleasure to chat with you today and even just scratch the surface
Same,
of
same.
data and gaming. I feel like there was just so much more we could have talked about and so much more I was interested in. So I probably will like follow up on another like coffee chat just to casually about this. And also, I
Yeah,
need to be able to visit you sometime at Riot just to check it out.
yeah, yeah. No, you're always welcome.
Yeah, you're like just talking about even that one use case, like with skins. It just really highlights all the like intention and work that goes behind just making a seamless and enjoyable user experience. And so, for those listening, whenever you pick up a game, just think of all of the intention that goes behind every part of that game. I've really come to appreciate that a lot more. So, thanks you for
I'm glad to
taking the
hear.
time to be with us and just like letting us peek into that window into your world.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. Really was.
And today was actually bittersweet. This actually rounds out our Frontiers mini series. It's been such a delight to host this series on the pair program, and it definitely wouldn't have been possible without the support and encouragement of Tim Winkler, and the Hatch IT team. Thank you for your sponsorship and for allowing for both myself and then everyone listening to continue exploring new frontiers and to learn from amazing people such as Tuck. And last, certainly never least, to those who have tuned in, whether you're a new traveler with us, on this last episode, or more experienced explorer who's been with us since the beginning, you have my sincerest gratitude. We've we've never we're never done exploring. Just generally, everyone always has something to learn from others. So I hope you're able to take, your nuggets of knowledge and gain new information from this series. I know is a value add to your life. And so from one data enthusiast to another, thank you and take care.